welcome to Wrestling and Everything, Coast to Coast with your host, Blaze Sotelo Esquire, and returning back to the show after a week off, Evan Ginsberg. So, we have a longtime guest show host. I have put him in the pantheon of the best guest show hosts that we've had on here, and that is one Benjamin the Playa Scala. Now, you didn't have that nickname before we had you last year, so we haven't had you on since March of 2024. So I'm sure there's a lot.
Holy crap!
Yeah, wow. No, it was a long drought, but it's great to have you back and welcome to the show. So as we're talking right now, Seattle is up 3-1 on Toronto. Any team that's not home wins a series in the AL. Gosh, I've never seen, you're supposed to have home field advantage, but every team in this postseason other than the Dodgers seem to be able not to win at home. So I find that kind of ironic. So we have that going on in the background. Of course, football's going on, but I did say that we could talk a little baseball tonight, and Evan does have a Mickey Mantle story for us, which we're just about to go to at the break. What is your Mickey Mantle story, Evan?
Back in the 80s, I was an avid autograph collector, and the most horrific autograph experience I ever saw was with Mickey Mantle, where we knew all the autograph collectors, the quote-unquote pros. Not that this was pre-internet. They weren't selling it on eBay or anything. Just we knew the autograph collectors. So this one guy was a legitimate Mickey Mantle fan. He wasn't an autograph collector. He just loved the Mick. So he comes to get Mickey Mantle's autograph in Manhattan, and he does the "I loved you as a kid, Mickey. I grew up on you. My dad used to take me to Yankee Stadium." Mickey Mantle, who was a nasty drunk, looked this guy in the eye, a legitimate fan, and said, quote, "Bullshit." And you could just see the guy was devastated, the fan, just devastated. And it was probably, I've gotten thousands of autographs in my life. Ever since I was 12 years old, my parents would take me to the Broadway theater and we'd stand by the stage door. That was the worst thing I've ever seen. It was just the guy, he just destroyed this poor guy. It's like if your childhood hero was a prick, So Benny, the opposite story is I'd wait outside Madison Square Garden and I'd meet Bruno. And he'd shake your hand and sign autographs and talk to you. And the first time it happened, I'm maybe 14 years old. It's like I didn't know when I got home. I made a conscious decision. Do I wash my hand or not? Because Bruno took it, And that was a wonderful experience. And ditto, superstar Billy Graham, who was the heel, who couldn't be any nicer. So as kids, this smartened us up because
you said Dusty Rhodes. Yeah, you said Dusty Rhodes never.
Dusty Rhodes and Andre the Giant would never sign autographs for us. They wouldn't so much as look at us when we were kids or young teenagers. So in my book, Wrestling Rings, Blackboards, and Movie Sets, I have a long chapter on autograph stories, and some of them are wild. Ringo Starr would not sign for us, and he said, quote, "You know what happened to one of us the last time we stopped?" That's a quote. Because this was in the 80s. This was not, John Lennon was killed in 1980. And the irony of that story is, Yoko Ono would stop and sign for everybody. You would think she'd be the one that was traumatized. She was super nice. So I would say for a good 5 or so years, I was collecting autographs like every day because I worked in Manhattan, and it was just a better way to spend rush hour than trapped on the trains. And we would wait by Letterman and Live at 5. Live at 5 was the news show. So for 2 hours, you had a half dozen 6, 7, 8 celebrities every day. And we'd have the gamut of experiences. Bruce Willis was one of the worst, and I'm still sorry he's in a bad state today. He's not healthy. But this guy wouldn't so much as look at you like you weren't there, like he was royalty and you were the peons. You know,
I not that I'm a celebrity of any type, but when I did get asked to sign autographs after wrestling shows, I always took it as the highest compliment. I always did. And no one's ever stopped me in an airport or in a restaurant or anything and asked for an autograph. I think I'd still do it. Because those are the people who make you basically, that's who you work for, are your fans.
Right. They're supporting you.
Yeah. And if you don't want to give a little bit back, I know, again, you should be able to eat. You should be able to watch a movie or go to a theater or, go to a sporting event in public without everybody hounding you. And some people don't have any, barrier in them that says this is the right way to act, this is the wrong way to act. But you've still got to be above that and just say, you know what? Yeah, it's these people. They're doing this because they care. And you shouldn't be offended by it. Although I do think that when people come up with a stack of things like this high and say, I want you to spend the next half hour signing stuff to fill in the blank so I can then make profit off of it by putting a person's name on it, personalizing it, and selling it on eBay. That's the other thing is that the autograph hunters have become so aggressive and make it, because it's a business for them too.
But let me say the other side. Let me say the other side of that. Okay, so as an avid autograph collector who did not sell the autographs, I just love collecting and meeting these people. Muhammad Ali would walk down the street, the most famous man in the world, and sign everything and anything graciously. This is the most famous person in the world at the time. And I could for the younger people, I could explain why. One, the technology had hit and he was on closed circuit and on ABC, Wide World of Sports, etc. So on. He was in everybody's living room, or, when he had a big fight, you'd go see it. Also, he fought George Foreman in Zaire, and he was living in the African world for 5 or 6 months. And he converted to, he became a Muslim. There
was no such thing as MMA.
Yeah, so the Muslim world knew Muhammad Ali. He was the most famous person in the world. He'd walk down the street, no security, nothing, and just sign for everybody. So when Rhea Ripley makes public announcements, do not approach me, I don't get it. I don't get it. And here's the thing. I was a passenger on various planes over the years. And one time I saw Fred Gwynn from the Munsters, and I asked him for an autograph. He was perfectly nice. I saw Sonny Rollins, who was, the Mount Rushmore of jazz musicians. I approached him for an autograph, and he perfectly nice. You don't have to, if you ask for one thing to be signed graciously, it shouldn't be a huge issue. Yeah, don't stalk people at airports with 20 pictures to be signed. But, I think celebrities, the benefits of being a celebrity from the groupies on down, the perks of being a celebrity to the crazy money some of them make. You could stop and sign one autograph. You could just say, I can only do one. I'm in a rush. And that eliminates the collectors. That eliminates the sellers, I should say. I could only do one.
Benny, have you run into any celebrities on like a plane flight?
I only once. So I was flying from Minneapolis. Actually, I was flying from Sioux Falls to New York on a business trip. And I mean, I've always been a white knuckle flyer, and there's really nothing else to do in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, but drink. So I had about, I'd say like 9 or 10 beers at the Sioux Falls airport. I get on, and you can't, back then, I don't know about now, but back then you had to change planes, or at least stop at Minneapolis. So this is about 1984. I had another couple of beers at the Minneapolis airport, just to make sure, maintain my buzz. And I'm on. It was Republic Airlines. I don't
Wow.
know if they're even in business anymore.
No, long
But
time.
I was like row 2 on this side, and I see this guy, this about 5'2", wearing a purple suit, walk on the plane with this beautiful girl, and this guy was about 9'14", and it was Prince. And this is right like around Purple Rain, right at the peak of his fame. Now I didn't ask him for an autograph. I mean, I'm thinking to myself, I know that I'm shit-faced, but this is Prince. So I tapped it. The other guy was obviously his bodyguard, and I poked him on the shoulder. I said, "That's Prince, isn't it?" He goes, "No, he's just flying to New York for a Prince lookalike contest." And I said, "Oh, really?" I said, "Oh, no, that's what a coincidence. I'm going for the Elvis lookalike contest." But yeah, I mean, I didn't bother him, but it's really funny and I knew when Evan said he had a Mickey Mantle story, I was so hoping that it was going to have a different ending. But I kind of knew it was going to, when you said the 80s and Mantle, Mantle didn't turn babyface until right before his death. But, the two people I wanted to meet my entire life were Gary Puckett and Bruno Sammartino. And I met Gary Puckett around 2012. I was working a home show at the Tampa Convention Center. And I see this guy walking down the aisle. And I'm thinking, I know this guy looks familiar. And I just don't know. I couldn't place the face. And finally, like the light bulb went on. I was like, holy crap, that's Gary Puckett. Now, my very first concert ever was in 1969. My parents took me to see Gary Puckett in the Union Gap at the Westbury Music Fair.
Wow. Yeah, I love that venue. It's still there.
Oh, what a night it was. And I walked up and said, "You're Gary Puckett, aren't you?" And, he could have been like, turned off by it. But he literally spent about 15 minutes chatting with me. He was like genuinely, I said, here we are 43 years later, whatever it was. And we laughed just because so much time had gone by. And it's funny because about 6 months later, he played down here at the Capitol. It's called the Capitol Center, I think, or Capitol Theater in downtown Clearwater. And I saw him again. And it was just so, the nostalgia was overwhelming. And then the other one, of course, was Bruno. But I wound up having dinner with Bruno. So, I guess I'm very blessed because my two experiences were phenomenal.
I have two. One was in an airline on the way back to San Francisco from New York. Mike Farrell from MASH was on the plane flight, and believe it or not, he was getting the plane flight back to San Francisco because he actually does live in Mill Valley, which is not far from where I live. And on the show, that there's the signpost that's there, and one of the signs that says to Mill Valley from Korea. They have the signpost that posts everywhere, and that was a tribute to Mike Farrell and his hometown of Mill Valley, which is across the freeway from Tiburon, which is where I grew up. So I was like, you really are from the Bay Area? He's like, yeah, that's something that wrote into the show just because everyone really liked Mike Farrell. And then the other one wasn't on a plane, but my parents went to while they're still alive. This was like probably 1993, 94. They went to come visit me, and they stayed at the Residence Inn in Sacramento. And we were having breakfast there, and in walks Lennox Lewis, of all people.
Okay.
I was like, at first I was like, why would Lennox Lewis? Well, my friend recognized him, was having breakfast with me and my parents, and I was like, what would he recognize him? I said, what would Lennox Lewis be doing at a Residence Inn? And you'd think he would stay in like the high end Hilton hotel, or Marriott, or something like that.
He was smart with his money.
Well, at first I thought, no, it's just maybe just some other guy who's there. But then all of a sudden, like 5 seconds later, his entourage all came in. I was like, okay, yeah, that is Lennox Lewis. And the thing that really impressed me or blew me away about Lennox Lewis, because we'd come over and say hi to him, he actually was really short. He's not as tall as I thought. Everybody in boxing seems like they're really tall. Like, you know, when you see them in the ring, you know, you don't really have a frame of reference. But he was a lot shorter than I anticipated him to be. He was a very nice gentleman, and I was really surprised. And oh, that was the other thing. I shook his hand. I swear to you, he had the softest hands of anybody I've ever touched hands with that's a professional fighter. He just, they were like, it was like touching a box of tissues. I was like, wow, okay. I was thinking his hands would be, super tough, but I guess you put him in gloves all the time, and he makes sure those things are his bread and butter. So I guess he makes sure to take care of them pretty well. But so there's that. Benny, tell me, have you been watching any wrestling recently, and or have you watched any wrestling documentaries
I
or
really haven't. I actually watched a little bit of Raw last night. I watched some last week. Not a whole lot. I'll watch the. I guess they're not even PLEs anymore, right? Now they're back on ESPN.
Well, sort of. I mean, if you're here in California and you're on Xfinity, you would think that we would get that. But for some weird reason, they made a secondary deal. So now we don't get those. We don't get the pay-per-views here in even though I pay plenty of money every month for my cable, I still don't get it. So, and you know what? I got to be honest with you. Boo hoo. I don't really feel like I'm missing anything. And with the recent announcement that the WWE is going to be having WrestleMania in Saudi Arabia, I probably miss it less now than I ever have. What do you guys think?
I I watched the WWE pay-per-view, and with the exception of Cena and Styles, I could have lived without the rest of it. And generally, I would say 9 out of 10 times the WWE pay-per-views are a mixed bag, and you're pretty numb through about half of it. And then Gunther or Cody or Cena, will salvage the show to some degree. But it's not that you're missing a great show by any means. And I watched AEW's Wrestle Dream, and they have a different set of issues because they put on very good pay-per-views, but it's 13 matches and it's 5 hours, and about about 3/4 of the matches, who's going to win because what their hierarchy is, so it's predictable.
It's usually going to be a run-in. If you bet on the run-in, the over/under on the run-ins.
Yeah.
Bet on the over for that, and you'll probably do
That's
okay.
right. It's running for the 1,000th time, and it's very predictable. But at least you're going to see some very good matches. I wouldn't say too many qualify as great, but see a bunch of very good matches.
Should change their branding and say AEW, where every match is a title match.
Yeah, I was thinking, I'm watching it, and Mercedes Moné has literally like a dozen or 13 different titles, but then there's another AEW Women's Champion, and I think that title is higher than Mercedes Moné's, but she has 12 of them. So,
and if you wait around long enough, they'll come up with another title during the actual pay-per-view. They'll actually create a title while you're watching. One will happen during the match. A title will be created.
I tell you what, I find far more enjoyment going on YouTube and finding a random, even like a Memphis wrestling segment. I watched one earlier.
That's what I've been doing. That's exactly what I've been doing.
I watched Tux Newman bring in Sweet Daddy Siki, supposedly to challenge Lawler, but it turns out that, Lawler had helped Siki do a benefit in Canada, and he turns babyface right during the interview and fires Tux Newman. But that is so much more compelling than anything I could watch on Monday or Friday night.
No, I've been going through Herb Abrams' UWF. You know, that I've always found that very entertaining. And, you know, if it's that old, it's basically new to you because you don't remember. I mean, I'm not one of these people like Leno who remembers every single detail from every single match he's ever been at.
That's Nikita too. Nikita.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Brezhnikov, he remembers everything. No, I do forget some of this stuff. So I'm enjoying watching some of these guys, you know, debut for the first time, like, guys like The Undertaker, you know, as and I've gotten into stuff with The Godfather as the Soul Taker, you know. When the Undertaker was the master of pain, a lot of people don't remember that,
Right.
you know, and a lot of like Dutch Mantel as a young guy where he could still wasn't in a wheelchair, you know, stuff like when Iron Mike Sharp was taken seriously. You know, these for me. It's fun. It's more fun to watch that stuff. The matches are that you have a lot fewer interview segments. That's one of the things that I really notice, you know, from the older wrestling, is that the interview segments never last more than like a minute and a half. The matches themselves are only about 4 or 5 minutes too. And obviously there's lots of squash matches that are really poor, you know, that are crappy. But it made me appreciate when they would have a main event with 2 or 3, 4 guys that you really recognize and really know the talent. When you saw, you know, a number of squash matches that would build up to a main event that you knew was going to be competitive and exciting, that was more fun than I feel like a lot of these WWE shows. And because all the shows were an hour, they had to really keep things moving. There's not a lot of replays of old stuff and rehashing of stuff. And there's certainly no commercials during the match, you know, interrupting the picture-in-picture thing, which Evan and I have rallied against from the very beginning. And it's just so, I mean, just might as well, just like Evan said, in Korea, when they do the matches, they run a bunch of commercials before the match in its entirety, then a bunch of commercials.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to take that exchange as long as you don't turn the volume up during the commercials, which is another real bugaboo of mine that, you know, I think in this world of AI and everything, they can't find a way to mute the goddamn commercials when it goes to an ad, you know? No, it gets worse. But you're about to say something.
For Championship Wrestling from Florida, for example, when they did have an interview, it meant something. Like I remember I would see Gordon Soley sitting at a desk, and on the other side of the desk might have been like Briscoe or Harley Race. And there was a big TV set in back of them. And then, you know, they'd show like a recent championship match, and Gordon Soley and Briscoe or Gordon Soley and Race would break the match down. And it just, you know, it made it feel so legitimate.
Well, they didn't treat their audience like total idiots, which I can't say happens now. Evan, your thought?
Gordon Soley, I consider the greatest wrestling announcer of all time, and he would make the matches sound like it was the World Series and the Super Bowl rolled into one. And I love Championship Wrestling from Florida, and I was a kid at the time, and it would come on 11:30 at night, and I would have to beg my parents. It was Tuesday night, every Tuesday. Please let me stay up. Please, I have to watch this. And they would begrudgingly allow me to stay up late and go to school tired the next morning. And but Championship Wrestling from Florida was amazing. And you know, it's funny, with all of wrestling fandom, you know, internet, social media, to this day, the guys I would watch on Championship Wrestling from Florida, I still don't know how good a wrestler some of these guys were, because I was a kid and everybody was 10 feet tall to me. And a lot of these guys I never saw in New York. Like Benny, you remember Missouri Mauler? Guys
yes.
Yeah, guys like this. Larry Heinemini and guys, they just
I've been watching Larry. I've been watching Larry and the CWF stuff.
AKA Larson, right?
But I'm saying, nobody ever talks about, was this guy a good worker? Was that guy a good worker? Because they're like forgotten guys from the territories. And I'd be curious, just how good were they? Because I didn't get this. Mongolian Stomper even. How
Goldie, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I didn't see him in New York.
He was mostly in Calgary.
Yeah.
But, that brings up a whole nother argument about wrestling and how much is wrestling really better now. And, I'll use CWF in Florida as a perfect example, that if you lived in Tampa, Florida, you could watch wrestling. You could go see wrestling 52 times a year, every Tuesday night. It became a part of your life because, number one, you loved it. Number two, it was affordable. You could afford to go see it every Tuesday night. And I'm sure, every Wednesday morning at the water cooler at work, people were talking about it. Hey, what happened last night? Did Dusty Rhodes win, or did Bugsy McGraw win, or and they ran this loop. I guess I forgot the whole loop. Like one night was Orlando, one night was Tampa. Then you had Miami Beach, Orlando. They ran this loop for years.
Fort Lauderdale. They do Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah,
too.
But and if you were a little bit ambitious, maybe they had a spot show in Sarasota. So if you lived in Tampa, you wanted to get in the car on a Saturday night and drive, hour and a half. Now you can watch it twice a week. But you now living in Tampa, if I wouldn't go to a show, I wouldn't pay to see a WWE show. But maybe they're here once a year. So how is it better for me as a fan?
Absolutely.
Well, it's just that there's so much on TV, and there was a discussion on your Facebook wall, Evan, about and one person piped in and said, hey, more wrestling is better, and I'm not sure about that. I'm not entirely sure. When I, as Benny was pointing out, when I watch the old CWF or UWF shows, and they're an hour long, I find those shows deliver to me greater entertainment and more ability for me to sit down and watch the whole thing than to sit there and go, oh, it's a 3-hour show. I got through an hour of it. My mind now feels like I've dunked it in a pail of ice and razor blades. And, can I go for another 2 hours? And when we talk about, a WrestleMania, 2 days worth, 2 days. Really, by the second day of WrestleMania, do you remember the matches from day one at all?
I go to AEW pay-per-views in New York, and you get there for the pre-show, 6:37, and the show ends right before midnight. Plus, you have to commute back and forth. So it's a long, grueling night, and if something is only okay or good or even very good, you're kind of numb. And finally, something great will come on, and that'll rejuvenate you. And
but more isn't always more. That's I guess the thing that I'm trying to throw out there is that more is sometimes less because you're just trying to pad out something. It's like buying a hamburger that's got a 4-foot large bun, and you've only got like a hamburger patty that's like this large, and you're just digging through all this gigantic bun. They're going, well, look at what a giant hamburger it is. It's like, yeah, but the actual meat part that you want to sink your teeth into is tinier than ever. So, do you guys feel kind of in there?
Right?
I was just watching AEW's Wrestle Dream. It took 3 days to watch it with 13 matches, and it was 5 hours or so. I can't sit through it all. I can't.
But a lot of the old shows back in the day, even Memphis and even New York, All-Star Wrestling, Championship Wrestling, really what it was a 1-hour infomercial to promote the next card at the Garden, because a lot of they're showcasing the heels and a lot of squash matches, and in the interviews, and the interviews all led up to that next show, and then they did the rinse and repeat, whether it be Baltimore, Boston, Philadelphia, they did the same thing. They promoted those shows, and it worked for years.
But Then the show had direction, and there was a reason why you were watching to get that buildup. Now there's so, as I've always said, like one of the big problems with having wrestling on so much is that they'll do a pay-per-view and the next night they have a set of shows. So they wind up either having to replay everything that just happened at the pay-per-view, or they're doing rematches of what just was at the pay-per-view. And so there isn't that kind of advancement of storyline. Like, you'd have, just like you're saying there, Benny, with the build, blow off. Now it's like build, blow off, build, blow off, build, blow off, build, blow off, build, blow off.
Yeah.
And there's no real build. I had a long discussion on one of the other, Facebook groups that I was in about there's a difference between a storyline and a build. And I think that a problem today is that people don't understand that the great storylines require a build. But building creates a commitment to a storyline and to wrestlers to build that storyline for you. And I think the WWE is chronically afraid, except with a few wrestlers, to do that kind of build, because they just don't, they're too afraid to themselves that they will not commit to that build fully. There isn't a year-long feud that then blows up in WrestleMania. There hasn't been one for, eons. I mean, maybe you can say the Cody Rhodes, Roman Reigns thing gets as close as you get to a year-long feud. But 90% of them, the build and blow-off is within a 1-month period of time. And that, to me, is not a build. What do you guys think?
The bloodline's been going since the late 1950s, as Letterman used to say.
Yeah. Seems that way.
But the individual build and blow-off storylines happen in this quick rotation so that there isn't like a long grinding build to a complete blow-off where another faction will destroy the bloodline and they'll disperse and they'll form a completely different group.
Go back to the old WWF, when Bruno was a champion in the, the late 60s. And it was a magic formula. It worked for years, but they bring in a new heel. Like they bring in Virgil Kentucky Butcher, who was, I think his real name was John Quinn, and Bobby Davis was his manager. And he just, he wrestled a few squash matches, and then it was always either Arnold Skolin, because that was Bruno's manager, or like an Antonio Pugliese, who was Bruno's cousin, and one of those guys was always going to take a beating for Bruno. Like I remember Arnold Skolin got stretchered out of the ring because they called it a whammy. It was a pile driver by the Butcher. And while Arnold's being stretchered out of the ring, Bobby Davis, who is to me is very underrated as a manager, and Butcher upended the stretcher, and Skolin literally is flying off the top rope. Now, the next week, Ray Morgan, provides an update on Arnold Skolin's medical condition. He's at White Plains Hospital, and he even gives the address where you can send cards and letters. And all of this is leading up to a match at the Garden, which, is going to, of course, completely sell out. And, of course, Bruno's going to deliver the payoff. He's going to demolish the Butcher. And then, then you bring in the next heel and you do the. But it, like you said, it required, there was a systemic build to that, and it did require a commitment of, maybe 2-3 months, and then you went to the next heel. And if it was really good, sometimes they'd have like 2 or 3 matches. If it was a really good feud with Bruno, or even with
Zbyszko,
yeah, or even like Backlund and Pat Patterson. That was 4 matches.
4 matches, yeah.
Yeah, but there were 4 great matches. But
right, and it took a commitment to build it up so that you had an emotional investment in who won or who lost.
Right.
Another excellent one, build and blow off, was the Greg the Hammer Valentine versus Tito Santana in a Continental fight.
Yes, sir.
I mean, those were ones that, like, when I was watching those, I was like standing up in front of the TV, like shouting at it, like wanting Tito to beat up Greg the Hammer Valentine. Or when Snuka went up against Morocco, people cared about like who won those matches. They were like, my friends would be arguing, in the schoolyard over like whether Morocco was going to beat up Snuka, or whether, Santana was going to get revenge back on Greg Valentine. Was he going to put the figure 4 on Greg Valentine? Or was Greg Valentine going to put the figure 4 on him?
But then you'd see a guy like, I remember being horrified when I saw who I was always one of my favorite wrestlers, Spiros Arion, the Golden Greek, attack Chief Jay Strongbow, and I was mortified. Like, I love Spiros Arion. This can't be happening. Yeah, poor Chief. He was always the victim. It was Maivia turn on him, Jimmy Valiant turn on him in the early 70s. But I guess but even that was done for a reason, because Chief was really the number 2 babyface. And by attacking him, whoever that new heel was, they had instant heat. But everything was done for a reason. And when you think about like a Memphis, they didn't have a 50 staff creative team. Who did they have? I think they had Jerry Jarrett and maybe Lawler and maybe Dundee.
Eddie Gilbert, Lawler.
And
Dundee,
in Florida you had Eddie Graham. After that you had Dusty Rhodes. You had a couple of people that built all these like phenomenal storylines.
And maybe it was easier that way because you had, a singular idea. I think all of us know that when you get committee groupthink involved in something, everybody wants to put in their 2 cents worth and get credit for the entire idea, And so,
yep.
No one's going to say, oh, that's just a great idea, let's go with that. They're going to say, it's a great idea, but it would be just a little bit better if we did things my way. You know?
Then you get a diluted product because you're getting a little bit of everybody's input, and some of it might not be that good.
Well, yeah, that's the biggest problem, is that so many people that the WWE have hired are people that like write, comedy sketches for, stand-up comedians, or they improv groups, or they
don't really have the wrestling background.
It's not just they don't have the wrestling background. I'm okay with not having the wrestling background, but they don't love wrestling. They do it because it's a fucking job. Okay? They do it because it's a paycheck. And that's the wrong place to start with wrestling. Is say find people who are money oriented first, and then love the sport or love the performance art second or third, or maybe not at all even. Remember, they had to fire that one lady who they had hired because she didn't even know the names of a lot of the wrestlers she was writing storylines for, and had no idea what it was about, and was just like, well, it's just a lot of guys just pushing each other around. It's like, if that's where you're coming from, don't be involved.
Yeah.
Don't be involved. I would rather have one person writing the storyline, could understand why, Jake the Snake Roberts versus Terry Taylor for the Universal Wrestling Federation's television title was an amazingly hot feud. What made that a hot feud? If they understand that, they're better off at booking than somebody that said, well, I used to write scripts for Everybody Loves Raymond.
Yeah.
So, and the WWE doesn't take that seriously. And the less the WWE takes that part of it seriously, the more it shows up in stupid stuff like what we were talking about with wrestlers being just squandered by the WWE. The WWE has had such a blessing of talent and has just left stuff at the buffet line that just really disturbs me. We were talking about Nakamura, and how the modern wrestling fan might say, Nakamura, what's so special about him? The guy's a joke. If all they saw was his WWE stuff, right?
Nakamura and AJ Styles for New Japan was as great a match as you're ever going to see. And then they had the very same match at WrestleMania, and it was just okay. That says everything. They basically neutered Nakamura, who could have been an all-time great, and instead he became just another warm body on a WWE card. And it was a shame because in New Japan, that guy was tremendous. So they destroy more talent than they create. That's why they keep going back to really old guys like Cena and CM Punk. They don't create young stars that often. Rhea Ripley's an exception, But most of the people, they keep going back to the same guys: Roman Reigns and Orton,
Cena.
yeah, Cena.
Right.
It's you have hundreds of people on a roster, and you can't make new stars.
But then they buy up all they buy up all the young contracts, so they can't get any kind of exposure anywhere else, like MJF or what they did with Gallows and Anderson. That's one of my soapboxes.
They had Swerve Strickland and Tony Storm, who are two of the greatest stars in the business now, and they didn't know what to do with them. So it says a lot.
What's your thought, Benny?
Well, I mean, I sound like an old geezer, but like I really think of course I am, but it worked so much better when there were 30 territories because 30 territories. Well, now you have 30 rosters, and of course you're not going to have 100 rosters and like a Portland territory, but you might have like 40, 50 guys. But those 40, 50 guys, they're going to work every night. They're going to be, they're going to be used, right? And they're going to be, and then maybe 9 months, a year later, then they go somewhere else and they can be a star there. And you can, you can hone your skills. Where now, what are these guys wrestling? Evan, like, are they wrestling 15 times a year even?
Not Roman Reigns.
Right.
Not even.
You look at any of the old guys, the old territory guys, and there's a website called WrestlingData.com, and you can click on any wrestler like an Arion, a Bruno, any of these guys, Danucci. They're wrestling 250, 275 times a year. Koloff did that. Ivan Koloff did that. I think it was like 12 years in a row. He wrestled at least 250 matches, but he worked everywhere.
And he just barely made the Hall of Fame this last year
after he died.
Begrudgingly.
The NWA champions like Flair would wrestle 350 days, which is where we got the title of.
I think I've heard that number before.
350 days. And Bret Hart said to us, as WWF champion, he wrestled 340 days. And Valentine, as the Intercontinental champion, said to me he wrestled 320 days. And Barry Windham, in an interview, not with me, on a different platform, said that he worked 89 consecutive days and he quit WWF. 89 consecutive days. How do you have a life?
Yeah, some people say, oh, well, you 60 days, you get 2 months off, but what they don't understand is that's including your weekends. When you say 320 days or 340 days, that means all your weekends are used up.
And Christmas and Thanksgiving. You're not at your kid's birth. You're not at your kid's wedding, whatever.
Yeah, and a lot of times you don't get to call when those 60 days are off. Or you need to save that time for when you're really hurt. Those 60 days off aren't always you at, the Riviera, with your feet kicked up, and enjoying the sun. It's you, getting a procedure done and then, being in bed for 3 or 4 weeks so that your arm or shoulder,
one of my pet peeves, the young fans today, they think they understand it all and they're corporate apologists. And Bret Hart said straight out, he said, they treated us like farm animals. I mean, you're shuttled from town to town, continent to continent, cross country, with no thought whatsoever. Like Benny was saying, the territories, you're going to go in Florida from one town to another town. You drive a couple hours. These guys were crisscrossing the entire United States night after night, and it left a long trail of the old, quote, good-looking young corpses.
But at least at that point,
survive it.
The one thing that I can say in defense of that is that the owners, at least, that were putting on these matches weren't making $250 million for a 2-day event and then keeping all of it for themselves and then saying, okay, here's a hot dog and a handshake. The WWE, just let go of a guy who was hurt. Chris, trying to not Helmsworth. Not Heyman. But they let a guy go who was injured, and it was ostensibly a cost-cutting move for the WWE. And that just, to me, just resonates so poorly with the announcement that, they're saying that they don't make enough money and need to charge more and price out families. And B, that they sold the WWE WrestleMania to Saudi Arabia for $250 million. I think that to say that you have to cut somebody and release them because they're injured to save money is just the most bullshit thing and it gets to the center of who I am as a person. It really makes me despise watching the WWE and helping support them when they treat their talent like that.
But the corporate apologist will do the quote, they all do it. So if the other corporations are evil, somehow it legitimizes, let's cut hundreds of people during record-breaking profitable WWE years. They've done that in the past. I'm not.
TKO is worse. TKO is worse. They are, and I didn't think there'd be anyone that could be worse than Vince McMahon and the WWE. But TKO comes right out and says it right to your face. It's at least Vince McMahon would do this stuff behind closed doors and would leak out. But TKO doesn't mind just making an announcement saying, hey, we want more money. You guys aren't giving us enough money. We need to make more money off of you. Get out of here, families. We want, independent internet influencers to fill our audience. And, while the matches are going on, we want everybody on their goddamn cell phones typing away about what a great match it is, even though they can't see what's going on in the ring because there's a giant post in their way. And we sold those tickets to them for $450 each, so they can sit there on their phones the entire time and talk about how influential they are by being at a show like this. What the hell is wrong with us?
Well, that's the times we live in, though. Now everybody's an analyst, everybody's a journalist, and when you go to see Seth Rollins I guess he's a heel now, right? But when he comes in, everybody's still singing along to it. So when you go to a wrestling match in 2025, you're going to be you're going for entertainment purposes. And then you're going to post on Facebook. You're going to break down all the matches and everything. Back in the day, you went as a fan and you had your heart in your throat because, is Bruno going to win tonight? Is Waldo Von Erich going to beat Bruno and be the champion? And the thought of that, like a Waldo or an Ivan Koloff or whoever it was, George Steele, the thought of one of those guys dethroning Bruno as somebody who, literally worshiped Bruno, the emotion that I had when I watched these matches, I almost feel sorry for the people of today because they're never going to feel what I felt.
Well, it was a totally different audience back then. In the 1970s, first of all, we'd go with our parents or grandparents or aunts and uncles, whatever the case may be. And World War II was only 30 years removed. So when they saw a Waldo Von Erich or, or Baron Von Raschke or whatnot, we were mostly a blue-collar mark audience.
The Kaiser. Do you remember the Kaiser?
Gerhard Kaiser,
Yeah.
So my point being, we believed when Bruno was getting kicked, when Pedro was getting punched, when they were bleeding, we felt it. We thought it was real. That was the school bully picking on us, and we felt every punch and kick. And the modern fan who treats this almost with like a religious fervor, where they're getting on an airplane to spend 4 or 5 figures to go on a religious pilgrimage to WrestleMania or whatever. This is not us down at the local arena in the 70s with our parents who, my dad never broke 25 grand. So one night at the Garden, tickets were $3 to $6 back then. they made an announcement that it was going up to 4-7, and the place let out a chorus of boos, because for that crowd, that $1 meant something.
Right.
And it was a sacrifice for our parents to buy tickets for us, but it was a blue collar thing. And Willie Gilzenberg was interviewed in the Daily News, which was rare. And he said, we're not going to outprice our fans. We're going to give them a good show for a good price. And
I hope their ghosts haunt the TKO executives. I hope their ghosts come back and haunt the TKO execs.
Well, these guys weren't angels either. Bruno broke his neck, and Vince McMahon Sr.'s pulling him out of the hospital bed. These guys, they blacklisted Bruno earlier on in his career.
They double booked him on purpose. Yeah, Evan, there was a guy, I think his name was Howard Jerome. Is that his name?
Yeah, 50 days. Yeah.
Yeah. But he said something. I will never forget what he said. And he said there's a fundamental longing in the human heart to see good triumph over evil. And that was wrestling for me for so many years. And they've completely lost track of that now.
I was going to say, do people really feel that way anymore?
There is no, absolutely. I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't think they care if good triumphs over evil.
Society itself has changed. And I'm not saying this as a grumpy old man. I'm saying, when you have a sea of corporate apologists who, we love Vince, we love Triple H, we love Trump, we love,
Dana White.
Different mentality. I come from an era, fight the power. Fight the power. You didn't want to be the man. You wanted to take down the man. Now there's a sea of young people that want to be the man.
It was the establishment, right, back then.
Yeah. So
Ginsburg, it's Evan. It's not they want to be the man. They just want to let the man do whatever the man wants, and they'll just stand by and cheer. That's what they want. They want somebody to do what they want, what that corporate entity wants them to do, and they want to obey that. So it's not even them wanting to be the man. They aren't looking at wanting to be leaders. I mean, they're not looking to want to innovate anything. They just want somebody to keep serving them the pre-made McDonald's-like meal that the WWE has become wrestling-wise, and just give it to them every day in that same bland, mass-produced format, so that they don't have to think much about what is coming up next. In fact, I was going to say, when we were watching wrestling a lot when we were a lot younger, blood happened, right? But it was something that was really rare and kind of like you weren't really expecting it. Now, fans go into matches expecting blood and waiting for it to happen, and then not satisfied until that has actually been achieved. And I don't think that was the way we were. When blood happened, we were like, oh man, he ran into the cage, now he's bleeding. That was like a thing you're like, oh, now it's really serious. Now it's like, well, where's the blood now? When's the blood gonna happen? I'm waiting for the blood. And that's not, to me, what wrestling should be about, or why we should be watching wrestling. I know it's a violent thing, so yeah, okay. Why aren't we expecting blood? It's that it's lost its element of intensity, and now it happens in a match, and you're just like, okay, well, that was supposed to happen because they brought out the tables, they brought out the chairs, they brought out the fluorescent light bulbs and hit each other with it. So I don't know. That to me is another problem too.
I mean, they used it very sparingly, at least to my memory, back, when I was watching, when I lived in Long Island watching championship wrestling. But then you have Larry Zbyszko clocking Bruno with a wooden chair. And Bruno was great at a lot of things. I don't think he was good at cutting himself, because there was a little pool of blood, and it was horrific. It looked like a crime scene. But the passion that he spoke with, the next time Vince Jr. interviewed him, and he called Larry Zbyszko a Judas.
Yeah.
And he went biblical. And the hate in his voice and like this. Bruno never usually acted like that. Bruno was usually pretty calm, but
And you
I mean,
bought it. It felt so real.
I mean,
You really
even
bought
like
it.
that was 1980, and by then, I was kind of, I've been watching wrestling for 12 years. I kind of knew the score, but even then, it's like, holy shit, that how did that happen? It took it. I believed again, just by that one event.
It was a great build. This is what I'm talking
Yeah.
about. And they just, nobody wants to do that anymore. They just want to get it over with and let's move on to the next thing.
I think Evan, he mentioned, I think society has changed to the point where, people don't want to wait for their gratification. They want it right now. They don't have the patience to wait for a build.
Bingo, bango, bongo. You got it. You got it. And
also the anti-heroes, are
hip.
From rap music on down, it's a different society. It's and I like rap music. I'm not making some blanket anti-rap statement, but
if you're a good guy, you're corny. If you're a face now, people think you're corny for being a face. Whereas you're cool if you're a badass and you break all the rules. And that's what people are more into rather than.
How many people cheered Walter Von Erich at a garden match against Bruno? I bet you, there couldn't have been anybody.
No.
You wouldn't have wanted to anyway.
Billy Graham, the Valiant Brothers, Randy Savage, even Morocco to a degree. These were like cool heels, and it was unusual back then. It was unusual.
Yeah, Piper.
Piper, sure.
Piper to me was the first one that I remember being so bad he was good. The people started really rooting for him because they liked how bad he was and how iconoclastic he was and how he never let anybody push him around. Even though he wasn't bigger than most of the guys, he just took it and always kept fighting, and people, and CM Punk, kind of translates that whole thing and keeps it going through that narrative. Where it doesn't matter whether he's face or heel, he still performs exactly the same way in the ring. Randy Savage too, that they never changed who they were. The fans changed who they were to root, for a guy as a face versus when he was a heel. And
I really think Superstar Billy Graham deserves a ton of credit because he was the first cool heel. Yeah. And as a WWF fan, you had 15 years of Bruno and Pedro, the baby faces, and all of a sudden now you have a heel champion, which you had transitional, you had Stasiak 9 days and Koloff for 3 weeks. Now you got a guy who's gonna, sticking around, but he was that charismatic, and and that charismatic that people he drew people to him.
The other thing was in 1975 when he debuted, you didn't have a gym on every corner, and he looked like he dropped from another planet. Between the body, the wild clothes, the patter. He was basically Muhammad Ali meets Gorgeous George.
And Hulk Hogan before Hulk Hogan was
Hulk Hogan borrowed just about everything.
He did, but he did it more successfully because TD and Vince, and so ironic that where wrestling is now versus where MTV is with the recent announcement that they're shutting down all their music channels. MTV is what made wrestling famous, and now wrestling watches MTV get buried in the backyard, and it moves on and becomes this tremendous thing. If you told me in 1980 or 1984 that wrestling would be more popular than music videos by the time before I turned 60, I would say, wow, some major stuff will have gone on, but here we are. So that was an interesting thing too.
It's so funny. I'm thinking that, if I was at the Garden in 1975 and I stepped out of the Garden and I stepped into a time machine and it took me to 2025 to a wrestling show, to me, it would be unrecognizable.
I would have said right before you stepped in the time machine, make sure to buy some IBM stock just before you step in there. or you know,
But like I would say, hey, take me back home right now.
yeah, exactly, and make a few bets on some football games and some horse racing and stuff like that. So
Yeah,
you
take me
can,
back. Well, take me back to September 1969, so I could bet on the World Series, the Mets and the Orioles.
there you go, there you go. Anyway, guys, I can't believe it. The hour's up. I mean, Benny, you make this time move by so quickly, and we love having you on the show. I don't want it to be another year and a half before you're back on the show again.
No,
So
promise.
we'll have you on again. Do you have anything to promote? Anything that you want to plug?
Well, I tell you what, my pride and joy right now is I do my podcast, and everybody knows that, but I do. It's an internet radio station, WANT. We got what you want. And every Sunday at 3:00, I transform into Benny the Jet, and it's for a couple of reasons. Not because of Benny and the Jets, the song, but it's because of the movie Sandlot. I love the character Benny the Jet Rodriguez, and I also am a lifelong, I'm embarrassed to admit it, New York Jets fan.
Yeah, that is
Benny the Jet.
That is something I would keep under wraps. That is something I would.
60s and 70s music for 2 to 3 hours every Sunday on this station. And I live for Sunday afternoons now.
Well, I have to call in and give you grief. There's a New Yorker cartoon that shows a guy being pulled over by the cop. He goes, "Oh no, not a ticket to a Jets game."
Right.
So that's another subject.
Thank God I'm old enough to have seen Super Bowl III. I mean, I at least I got to live through that. I mean, I'll never see that again, but I got to see Joe Namath beat the Baltimore Colts.
No, you'll need that time machine to go to see another Jets Super Bowl, I think. So, Evan, why don't you plug what needs plugging?
I hope people will support the film Brownsville Bred that my dear friend Edwin Vasquez has done the music for. It's an indie film done on a very low budget. It's playing in Florida, Benny. It's indie, and it's a true story about a musician who was an addict and his daughter and their relationship. And was shot in Brownsville and in Puerto Rico, and it's a beautiful film. I hope
it becomes available streaming. I want to see it. It's not available in the theaters.
It's from the heart, and check out my book, Wrestling Rings, Blackboards, and Movie Sets. Check out 350 Days. I do a movie review page. It's called From the Odd House to the Grindhouse. I watched The Substance last night. That's a wild film.
Wow.
Demi Moore and Dennis Quaid. Crazy film. Check it out.
Well, it's great to have you guys on. By the way, congratulations, Toronto, for getting to the World Series. It's going to be all blue-white World Series. I hope Ohtani totally chokes.
Oh, did they win?
Yeah, they won 4-3. So
no, I'm glad. Okay, so
I want Seattle to go. When is Seattle ever going to win a World Series in our lifetime?
I don't care.
But I think they were just happy to make the postseason and to get the ALCS. So
now I want the Blue Jays to win.
Oh, me too. As a San Francisco Giants fan, you think I'm going to root for the Dodgers? Think again. But
I would have wanted the Mariners to win.
Another story for another show, or maybe next year we'll do the baseball show again. I missed it this year because I was in the middle of moving and everything. But next year we'll do another all baseball show, and we'll have your pal Alfred on to represent your Mets. And
hey, could I tell a 30-second baseball story?
Sure, yeah, throw it out there.
So Benny, I'm at Shea Stadium, and the Pirates are playing the Mets. And Bob Moose is pitching a no-hitter against the Mets. And the Met fans start rooting for the Pirates because they want to see a no-hitter. So all of a sudden, Roberto Clemente makes a diving, unbelievable catch to save the world, to save the no-hitter. And I'm a kid, and my grandfather's sitting next to me. It's the first baseball game he's ever been to. He's from Russia. He wasn't a baseball fan. He thought no-hitters happen like every day, because it's the first game he went to. So that's the funny part of the story. The sad part of the story is a couple years later, Bob Moose dies in a car wreck, and Clemente goes down in the plane doing humanitarian work.
Yeah, total tragedy, total tragedy. Yeah. Well, guys, great to have you on the show. We'll have you again on, Benny. It won't be a year and a half. And really, thanks for being part of everything. We'll see everybody next week. Good night, everyone.